What's up, YouTube audience? Today I'm here to talk to you about a topic that I'm very passionate about and one that has caused me a lot of thought and a lot of hours of research and time, and that is which camera to buy. And I just made my choice probably about a couple weeks ago, and the choice that I made was actually really surprising even to me. And I chose to buy a 2-year-old camera, and that is this camera, the Sony a7rii Mark II. And I'm going to today talk to you about the reasons why I chose to buy it, maybe some reasons that you might choose to buy it right now, and some things that you can look forward to in the future, hopefully. So here we go. Now today I want to talk to you about the main idea of why I chose to buy a 2-year-old camera. Now, just to give you a little background on me, I work in the technology field, and 2 years old in technology is like ancient, and I normally wouldn't make that choice. The camera I decided on was the Sony a7rii Mark II, and I love this camera for a lot of reasons, and I'll talk about them today. But first, before I get into that, I want to talk to you about the history of my experience with cameras and what I've bought thus far. So the purpose that I use my camera for is a couple things. I do some photography of my kids and also special occasions and people who ask me to do weddings and photo shoots and that kind of stuff. But I do a lot of video on the side as well, not only for this YouTube channel, but just to capture life. I also volunteer my time for a lot of nonprofit organizations that ask for videos, for interviews and that kind of stuff. And I do some live events for my church. Now, my background in cameras, my very first camera ever was the Nikon D80 back in the day. I bought it in college and it was amazing. The first time I bought it and took it out of the package, the first shot I ever took was of my wife, then my girlfriend. And the amazing quality of bokeh compared to what I've been shooting with a point and shoot before, just the ability to have and adjust depth of field and aperture and all that stuff, to me it was an amazing thing. And this was probably 2005, 2006 when I bought that camera. So fast forward from there, I had that camera for a couple of years, and that's what I really learned on. I learned how to I shot my first couple of weddings on that camera, I did my first couple of portrait sessions, and just some candid shots of my family. It was awesome, and it changed my life. But then I really started to get in this concept of how do you incorporate video into the equation with DSLRs. That was right about the time the 5D Mark II had just came out. Low light capabilities were off the charts compared to what was on the horizon. And the 5D Mark III was rumored to come out very soon after that. Best of both worlds, right? Had great still capabilities, had great video, 1080p, and beautiful, right? So I saved up all of my money at the time and I got the 5D Mark III in the 51.2 L series glass. It was amazing. That was, I believe, in 2013. It was right before my first daughter was born, and I could not tell you how excited I was when I first laid eyes on it and first started shooting pictures and video of it. And then my daughter was born. Oh, it was great. I got the chance to take her pictures right when she was a newborn. I recorded the entire birth, I censored it, don't worry, of my first child, and it was a great thing to have on camera. Then after a couple of years, I think I had it for 2 years, I started hearing rumblings about the GH4. It's a Panasonic GH4. So going from a full frame sensor to a crop sensor to a micro four thirds sensor, which was even smaller. And I'll post some links for different relevant topics that you can go research these cameras on your own and what the difference between full frame and micro four thirds is. But this camera could shoot internal 4K. It had 96 frames a second at 1080p, so you get that nice buttery smooth slow-mo in this small form factor. And honestly, I loved it. Right out of the box, I was really blown away with the 4K quality. The crispness compared to the 5D Mark III was amazing, the video especially. But honestly, it always lacked in the stills department. And even in micro four thirds format, what I found out after a while was it's very tough to do two things specifically. Get very shallow depth of field and have a wide range of lenses that compared to a Canon L series or a Sony G Master series or some of the Nikon higher end glass. You can argue that point a lot, but I just couldn't find exactly what I wanted for the price. So then I rented the Sony a7rii Mark II on vacation, and I'll throw up some slots here or some pictures here that I took from the vacation as well as video. I would stop and say at this point and try to hammer down this. When you have the opportunity, it's always worth it to rent the gear that you're trying to buy before you buy it. And the reason is this. If you rent the gear, let's say for instance you rent from a great reputable site like borrowlenses.com, or if you rent from Lens Pro to Go. These two companies will let you try out the lenses and the cameras before you buy them. And it's a great opportunity and a great investment. Before you go out and spend thousands of dollars on gear, spend a couple $100s at most to rent them for 3 days or a week and try out the gear before you actually buy them. I would highly recommend this. This is what I did. So when I got this Sony a7rii and I rented it, I was blown away by not only the stills quality, but also the autofocus for video, internal 4K. It was just an amazing quality to it. But the thing is, it was 2 years old. That's a lot older camera. So what do? I immediately, of course, start going on rumor sites. I say, what's out there currently in the market? What is it saying about the Sony a7rii or the Sony a9S or R, whatever's next? So initially, I sold my Panasonic GH4 right around the time of NAB in 2017, thinking that it would be the next Sony camera would be announced at NAB the next week. Well, guess what? I was dead wrong. A week went by, nothing from Sony. A month went by, nothing from Sony. I'm studying the rumor sites. They say, well, maybe later in September in 2017. Nothing thus far as rumor sites. And then a week goes by, and all of a sudden I hear on the rumor sites, the next Sony camera is not going to be until 2018. That's a long time. Now for me, at the time, this was back in June. And for me to wait 8 months, 10 months, possibly even a year before I physically had the next Sony camera in my hands, that was too long. That meant a couple things. I would miss a lot of priceless memories of my kids. I would miss a lot of opportunities to make money and shoot on the side. And I just wasn't willing to make that bargain. So I invested in the Sony a7R Mark II. Now, you might say, what other kind of stuff did you actually research and did you consider in your buying process? I'll tell you. So I thought about a couple cameras. The Canon 80D. This is the Casey Neistat camera. This is what he filmed all of his vlogs on. It's amazing autofocus for video. It is only 1080p. And the stills are okay. Matched with a good lens, it would probably be decent. But I chose not to get that one. Next up was the most recent announced Canon 5D Mark IV. Now, if you've done some research on this camera, this had a lot of mixed emotions when it first came out. The Canon 5D Mark IV was awesome because it was a newer version of Canon 5D Mark III, and it also had 4K finally. However, the 4K was in a horrible format called Motion JPEG. And if you're not familiar with this format, you're only familiar with formats like H.264 or AVC HD. This format literally takes one picture for every 24 seconds of video, and then you have to combine that in post to make one video file, meaning about a minute worth of footage is about 4 gigs of information and data. 4 gigs. Now, when we talk about that much storage on a camera when you're shooting video, you're talking stacks and stacks of hard drive that you need just to encapsulate and save all of that data. To me, that was not the best way to go. The other thing that the Canon 5D Mark IV that they didn't have, but now since a firmware update has came out, was Canon C-Log footage, the ability to grade things in a super flat format with lots of dynamic range, so no-go. Staying in the Canon line, I thought about the fact that I could possibly go with the 1DX Mark II, but when you start looking at the pricing, the 1DX Mark II, just for the body alone on that camera, is $5,000. That's not getting you one lens, that's not getting you a monitor that's a flip-out monitor, that's not getting you any kind of mic, that is just the body alone. A lot of money. So I got to adding up the things there, and that's like twice as much probably as I wanted to personally spend on a camera at this point in time. Now, I say that, but I'm gonna go to the other cameras. I was like, maybe if I wait a really long time, I can just save up for like a Red Raven or a Red Scarlet, about, 9, 10, 13 grand. There's also the C100 Mark II, the C300 Mark II. Awesome video cameras, not great stills cameras. I even thought about maybe just doing a small Sony camera with like the RX100 Mark V. Lots of different things coming about. And I landed on the Sony a7R Mark II, like I said. Now, when you're considering these two options, Sony a7S Mark II or Sony a7R Mark II, these are the two questions you have to ask yourself. Do I want amazing video that shoots slow motion in 120 frames a second at 1080p, 4K, that can basically see in the dark, but only 12 megapixels for stills? Or do you want 42 megapixels for stills? Do you want 4K that shoots 24p, has amazing autofocus, but does not have the slow motion in 1080p. It only has slow motion in 720p. Those are your two main choices. And for me, the choice that I decided on for now, like I said, was the Sony a7R Mark II. Thus far, these are my initial first impressions. I bought originally the 24-70 Sony lens, the G Master, and it was amazing. Super crisp, great quality, cannot say anything about it. The only thing negative from that, I do a lot of vlogging, so I hold the camera in my hand to try to vlog. Very, very heavy lens. I returned that one, and now I'm shooting on the 12-24 G Master, which is at f4. Super, super light lens, however, really wide, 12-24, and you can shoot crop mode on the Sony a7R II. Great lens. I will probably land on this. I'll probably honestly land on the Sony G Master that just came out, the 16-35, which will come out hopefully in August. That's the one that I will probably land on for the long duration before I try to invest maybe like in a telephoto in the future. But that's it. So thus far, that's my reasoning and the best thing I can tell you about why I chose to get the Sony a7R Mark II at this time compared to all the other cameras that are on the market right now. Now you say, great, Drew, that's awesome that you picked this camera, but I've heard a lot of bad things about this camera and things that it can't get past. I'm not saying it's a perfect camera. Top two complaints about this camera are this: battery life. I'll talk about that one. And the fact that, like I said, it does not have the high ISO like the Sony a7S line. Now let's talk about battery life first. The average Sony battery for this camera can cost anywhere from $30 to $50, which is a lot. And this camera on an average day of shooting, if you just go out and shoot for a couple hours, you honestly need probably 2 to 3, if not 4 batteries to make it through that day. If you start doing time lapse with your monitor on, you're probably talking even more than that. So I recently watched a video by Caleb Pike over at DSLR Video Shooter, and he recommended this company that is called DTSE. I'll link to the show notes in Amazon, and they're a great company. For 20 bucks, you get 2 batteries, and they're actually a higher milliamp than the actual Sony batteries. However, that only includes the camera itself, the batteries that are included in the camera and batteries that you can put in the camera. I actually invested in the small HD focus monitor that just came out this year at NAB. And this is the reason why. The reason why is you can invest in some higher milliamp batteries like this, the Anton Bauer battery, or a DTSE battery that's a smaller form factor than the actual Anton Bauer. And these have the small HD focus monitor has an awesome function where you can actually send power out of the monitor that's coming from the battery into the Sony camera and power the Sony camera via a dummy battery. So you go from having to buy a ton of these little batteries to buying one of these, and you're also powering the monitor that's on there. And you're saying, Drew, that's a lot of stuff. I don't want to buy all that. What's another option for battery life? Well, you can always get a portrait grip for the Sony a7R Mark II. That will give you then 2 extra batteries that you can have inside the camera at all times and have a much longer runtime for video footage or photography as well. So those are some suggestions that I have for you if you're trying to get past the battery life barrier on this camera. Other than that, honestly, I don't have a lot of complaints about this camera. It shoots S-Log3, which has amazing dynamic range. It has amazing, amazing dynamic range inside the RAW file for stills. And the autofocus for video is amazing. If you want to check out another resource that you don't just trust me for autofocus for video, Dave Dugdale actually did a brief video about the Sony a7R Mark II's autofocus video as compared to the Sony a7S Mark II's video. And that's what I would suggest you checking out. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. I know it was a little different from what you've seen, but I'm trying to turn my channel not only just to vlogs about my life and travel and family, but I want to, like the motto says on my website, I want to be able to learn with you guys, I want to create with you guys, and I want to be able to share with you guys. So until next time, thanks so much for watching.